The man who killed Halloween and his own son. Why did an American hand out poisoned candy to children, including his own? What did he request for his last meal before his execution? Trick or treat? This phrase is also often heard during All Saints' Day or Halloween. Children in witch and ghost costumes knock on neighbors' doors and ask this question. The adults playing along usually answer, treats of course, and give the school children sweets. But in the small Texas town of Deer Park, the traditional fun ended in tragedy. 8-year-old Timothy O'Bryan truly paid with his life for a single piece of candy laced with a deadly poison. On October 31, 1974, a model family man, a deacon at the local Baptist church, and just a good guy as his neighbors called him, Ronald O'Bryan warmly welcomed guests, his sons and daughters' classmates. He gave everyone baskets for sweets, helped them put on their costumes and apply makeup. Soon, the noisy group headed to the neighboring city of Pasadena to walk the night streets, scare passers-by, and collect as many treats as possible. However, in one house, it seems the ghouls were not welcome. After an unsuccessful attempt to get treats from the residents of one of the houses, the children moved on, but Ronald lagged a little behind. He later caught up with the children, gave each a piece of candy, and said that if they had been a little more patient, they would have received candy directly from the resident of the house as a gift. A few hours later, Ronald O'Bryan drove the children home. The parents sincerely thanked the man for organizing the holiday. Before bed, his son Timothy asked to enjoy at least one piece of candy. His father nodded in approval, and the boy chose the very one that was supposedly given to the children by the unwelcoming homeowners. After the boy tried the candy, he said it had a disgusting taste. His parents gave him some soda, and the boy went to the bathroom as his stomach suddenly began to hurt very sharply. The parents called an ambulance, and he was taken to the hospital. O'Bryan told the police that it was the most terrifying time of his life as the boy was dying in his arms. He died on the way to the hospital an hour after trying the fateful candy. The horrifying news spread through the city in an instant. Worried parents immediately brought all the sweets their children had collected that night to the police. Fortunately, no other school children tried the poison treat. One boy tried to get a candy but couldn't tear the tight packaging and fell asleep with it in his hand. No one had any doubt that Timothy had been poisoned by something from his Halloween haul. These candies had an unusual smell, the smell of almonds. It was such a dose of this poison that it would have been enough for 2 adults, let alone 1 child. The children remembered these specific candies, the ones Ronald O'Bryan had given them, and the police came to the Baptist. He couldn't remember which house had given him the poisoned sweets. No wonder, as the man had gone through such stress. However, the investigators were in no hurry to leave without the necessary information. Later, he remembered and gave the house number. It turned out that a man named Courtney Melvin lived there. The police arrested him, but an alibi check made it clear that the man wasn't even home that evening. Courtney only returned after 11, and before that, about 200 people had seen him in another location. It was then that the police realized who had sent them on a false trail and why the grief-stricken Ronald O'Bryan was stalling and didn't immediately explain where he got the poisoned candy and, most importantly, why his son, specifically, had died. The parishioners had no idea that the Baptist deacon's life was one long black streak. Serving in the church didn't bring in much money, and Ronald O'Bryan tried to get any job he could, but he never stayed anywhere for long. He was fired from everywhere with scandals, for skipping work, being late, and conflicts with colleagues. In 10 years, he had changed 21 professions. He was a cook, a pizza delivery man, a postman, but his salary wasn't enough to support his children. The head of the family fell into terrible debt. When the police began to investigate Ronald's life, it turned out that he had large debts, about $100,000, and his car and house were already under seizure and were about to be auctioned off. His last employer was going to fire him on suspicion of theft, but most importantly, a few months before this incident, he had taken out life insurance policies on his children. At the insurance company, Ronald O'Bryan said that he had recently been terribly worried about his son and daughter. He claimed they were often sick and might soon need the help of the best doctors. Then he chose the most expensive policies. This seemed suspicious to the firm's employees even then, but the whole town knew O'Bryan as a model family man, so the specialists drew up all the necessary documents. Under these insurance policies, he was supposed to receive about $60,000. It's terrifying to think about how one could use a child's life for such purposes, but in fact, the whole picture came together for them at that moment. Moreover, Ronald O'Bryan called the insurance company the very next morning after his son's death, even before the funeral, and asked when he could file a claim for the payout. Soon, the police finally had a key witness in the case of 8-year-old Timothy's death. In search of evidence, investigators went to a chemical company. It turned out that a certain man had tried to buy poison from them but refused because the minimum batch was about 5 pounds. The employee of this company could not identify Ronald O'Bryan, but said that the man who came to the firm wore a blue uniform similar to medical one. O'Bryan worked as an optician, and this was his work attire. If up to this point, the Candyman, as the poisoner was nicknamed in the press, had vehemently denied his guilt and tried to convince everyone that a maniac was on the loose in the city, he couldn't withstand the confrontation with the chemical company employee. He began to get confused in his testimony, became agitated, but still did not confess to anything. The final trial in the Candyman case was called the fastest death sentence verdict in American history. The jury needed only 46 minutes to unanimously find the defendant guilty. He was sentenced to death with no right to appeal the decision. O'Bryan declined to make a final statement, but he did take the opportunity to choose his last meal. Before his death, the criminal requested a T-bone steak with potatoes and gravy. That is, he wasn't thinking at that moment about his child or about what had happened. On March 31, 1984, he was executed by lethal injection. At that time, about 300 people had gathered outside the hospital where it all took place, and they applauded the event. After these horrific events, the town of Deer Park abandoned the tradition of collecting candy on the eve of All Saints' Day for a long time. The poisoner's wife filed for a divorce immediately after his arrest, left the state and remarried, and Ronald O'Bryan became known in America as the man who not only killed his son, but Halloween. For several more years in neighboring towns, school children were allowed to ask for candy, but they were not allowed to eat it.